Welcome to another episode of the Cassels cast. My name's Eamon Cassels. Joining me today is going to be Elie Deglaoui to discuss some of the NBA contenders and pretenders. Should be a really fun episode. Let's get into it. Joining me now is Elie Deglaoui to discuss some NBA contenders. We're going to do a tier list of contenders. We're not going to do just the basic contenders, pretenders. We're going to do a whole tier list, so it's a little bit more nuanced. But anyway, how are you doing today, Elie?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm excited. It's a good day. Let's talk about some playoff basketball.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it should be a good time. I think this is really the perfect time of the season to do it. We're about a month and a half away from the playoffs, so yeah, let's just get into it. I'm gonna start sharing my screen so everyone can see the tier list. All right, so in the tiers we got our title favorite, so that's just the one team we feel the most confident about winning the title. Then we have clear contenders, and then we go to puncher's chance. So this is a team that are not necessarily clear contenders just yet, but you really can't count them out of a playoff series, and who knows, if things go right for them, if they have the right matchups, they could even make the finals. And then some upside is a team that could maybe win a series, maybe even two series, but it's kind of unlikely, but they definitely have some level of upside. And then pretenders at the bottom, those are teams that are just going to be first-round exits. All right, let's start with our title favorite. Who you got as your title favorite, Elie?
So my whole deal is I'm extremely superstitious, so I will never predict my team to win anything, and I'm not a Cavaliers fan. So my title favorite is OKC. I knew the Thunder were good last year. They made some really nice additions in the offseason. I think when they got Alex Caruso, that was kind of what made me say this is a team to keep an eye on, as if they weren't one already. They were the one seed last year. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander finished as the runner-up for MVP and will probably win it this year. But that team's a juggernaut. They're elite on both sides of the ball, and they've missed Chet Holmgren for most of the season, and they're still far and away the number one seed in the West. I think they're 100% the team coming out of the West, and I would be very shocked if they don't, at the very least, make it to the NBA Finals.
That's definitely reasonable there. OKC has just been so dominant all year, and there's really no flaw with that roster. They're extremely deep. They have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who's one of the best players in the league, MVP level season. So I definitely think that's a good pick, and I definitely respect not picking your team due to the superstitious reasons. I am a Celtics fan as well, and I'm going to have the Celtics as my title favorite. I think when you look at this team, it's very similar to the Thunder in the sense that there's really no flaw in this roster on both ends of the court. And at the same time, I think they just have that advantage of having that playoff experience. And they do have just as much talent as the Thunder, if not more. I think when you look at those two teams, those are definitely the two most talented teams in the league. But I think the Celtics experience just gives them a huge edge. When you look at the history of teams that win a title, they usually have a little bit more experience than the Thunder. So that kind of does concern me with the Thunder a little bit. And then with the Celtics, I think we've seen them coast a little bit in the regular season, although they have been really good over the last month or so and still overall very dominant throughout the regular season. But when you get into the playoffs, this is a team that you just don't want to match up with, and I think they're a terrible matchup for any team. They can just beat you in so many different ways, and we saw that last year with just how dominant they were en route to winning that title. So for me, I'm going to have the Celtics as my title favorite, but OKC is definitely a respectable pick there.
Yeah, with Boston, I mean, putting on my NBA fan cap, I mean, we've seen it. People have said it all last year. People are saying it all season this year. They said in the playoffs. It's going to be very difficult for any team to beat them four times in a playoff series. And I just think, I mean, we even saw it last year. They weren't fully healthy in the playoffs. Kristaps Porzingis missed almost the entire run, and they still basically walked to a championship with ease. And their closest series ended in a sweep. And I mean, I feel like if you just watch the games, you kind of can tell the chemistry is even better this year. Everybody's really bought into their role even more this year. And I know, technically speaking, their record is, they're on a pace to finish with a worse record this year. But I think at times it's pretty clear that this team may be even better than they were last year. I think the only problem is there's just so much more competition in the league now, even than there just was last year. But when you look at that Celtics roster, I mean, they're one of the best at every level of the game, and it's going to be very difficult for any team to beat them in a 7-game series.
Yeah, for sure. I think you brought up a good point. I mean, they haven't been as dominant record-wise, but in some ways they are better this year. And I think that's sort of a common thing that we see with these teams that end up repeating. They might not be as dominant in the regular season. It might be a more challenging road in the playoffs, but at the end of the day, they still get it done. And I think this is a team that really just checks all the boxes for me, and I do see them repeating. We can move on to the next tier, clear contenders. I'm going to just throw the OKC Thunder in that tier immediately. I mean, for me, we already talked about it. They're not my title favorite, but they're absolutely contenders, just loaded from top to bottom, and their defense has really been incredible. Number one defense in the league by a significant margin, and that's something that I don't think will change in the playoffs. And I think specifically in those playoff settings, that's going to be a huge advantage as the games sort of get a little bit more low score and a little bit more physical. I think that Thunder defense will play to their advantage, and then offensively with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander just being one of the best scorers in the league, that's huge for them. We'll have to see if Jalen Williams is able to rise to the occasion in the playoffs. He did struggle a little bit last year. That's sort of my only concern there. He has been great in the regular season, but he needs to really keep up that second option level of scoring in the playoffs and even rise his level of play, because that's what we see in the playoffs being so crucial to these teams. And then Chet Holmgren coming back is obviously huge for them, as you mentioned. I think him and Isaiah Hartenstein just defensively is really difficult to match up against, specifically in the interior. And then offensively, he can also sort of take the weight off Shai's shoulders and then sort of be insurance for if J-Dubs doesn't have that great playoff series, Chet can be that second option offensively. So this team really has it all. And then just some of the best role players in the league with Isaiah Hartenstein, Lou Dort, who's just a lockdown defender who can take stars out of a game. I think that's really huge in a playoff series. And then you got guys like Aaron Wiggins, Cason Wallace, Isaiah Joe. This team's just really loaded with talent.
Yeah. This team's loaded. This team's amazing. And it's like, I knew they were a good team. They were the number one seed last year. And I know, like I said, they made some key additions in the offseason. But this team is in a conference that everybody kind of considered the superior conference in the West. They are, I think, 8.5 games ahead of second place. And they are, and like I said this already, but they are hands down, in my opinion, the best team in the West. Not that that's a bold opinion, but I think they're probably the only team that can realistically make it out of the Western Conference. There are a ton of, we'll get into it. There are a ton of other teams that are great. I'm not saying the Thunder are the only good team there, but when you just look at them in comparison to the rest of the conference, I mean, it reminds me a lot of how Boston was in the East last year. It was kind of like Boston's clearly number one. Everybody else is just fighting for second place. That's how I feel about OKC. They're young. They are the best defensive team in the league by almost every metric. And they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who I believe is the leading scorer in the NBA. I believe he averages the most points per game. And they have so much depth behind him that I just can't imagine the Thunder not making it to the finals this year.
Yeah, no, that's definitely understandable. There is one team that we'll talk about a little bit later that I could see actually upsetting them, but we'll get into that one later. And then, obviously, I assume that you have the Celtics in your clear contenders tier. Next team, I'm going to guess we both have in this tier is the Cleveland Cavaliers, another team that's just been super dominant throughout the season. I have been surprised a little bit by them. I did think they were going to have a good regular season, but I've definitely been surprised by their dominance. They're 5 or 6 games ahead of the Celtics right now in the standings, which is really crazy to think about. I definitely did think the Celtics would be that number one seed again, but the Cavs have really been awesome. That elite front court and elite backcourt with Mobley and Allen in the front court and then Garland and Mitchell in the backcourt is just a really incredible combination. And then their win depth is really incredible as well with Dean Wade, Max Strus, and then DeAndre Hunter was a huge trade deadline acquisition. And I think that's really going to serve them well in the playoffs, especially going up against Boston. I think just adding a guy like DeAndre Hunter, who's a super versatile defender, allows them to match up a lot better with Boston in the playoffs. So I definitely give them a chance to maybe knock off the Celtics. They're definitely the biggest threat to the Celtics in the East. I definitely still favor the Celtics due to their experience, but this is a team that does have a really good shot to win an NBA championship, and Kenny Atkinson's just done such an incredible job. He's really elevated Evan Mobley's game. He's allowed Garland to thrive as well, and really everyone eats in this offense, and it's awesome to watch, and it's pretty crazy to think that this team is the top ranked offense because under JB Bickerstaff for the past few years, this team really thrived under their defense, and that was sort of their identity. So they've sort of shifted that a little bit while remaining elite defensively, and just sort of that balance makes them such a good team.
Yeah, I think you touched on it perfectly because I think when you look at all three of those teams, Boston, OKC, and Cleveland, the one major thing they have in common is that they're the complete package. Like they do everything everywhere. And the Cavaliers, the crazy thing about the Cavaliers is I was pretty high on them coming into the season, but I never would have guessed they were going to be the number one seed. I actually did a preseason ranking where I kind of just predicted the conferences. I had them as the fifth seed, and I thought that was kind of being generous. So the fact that they're up to the number one seed is pretty insane. And the fact that they're pretty far ahead of Boston at this point. And I mean, the crazy thing to me is they've been this team for a couple of years. Obviously, I mean, technically they got better, they have new coaching, but what I mean is they've been this kind of two-way monster for a couple of years. I believe it was 2 seasons ago. They finished top 5 in offense and defense, but obviously nothing came of it. And I just kind of feel like this is, in a way, what they're supposed to be. And I mean, they had 3 All-Stars this year? Well, I don't think it was 4. They had 3 All-Stars this year. I mean, I know a lot of people kind of are reluctant to call them title favorites because they have, especially recently, they have a history of kind of choking in the playoffs and not stepping up when it matters. But in a league that has 2 clear juggernauts, the Cavaliers have a better record than both of them. And we are only about 2 months removed from the end of the season. It's not a coincidence. I think that they're as high up as they are. They're definitely going to be a scary team to monitor in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. And I really do think that Kenny Atkinson has changed a lot of those concerns, especially with the double bigs. We see Mobley spacing the floor a lot better this year, and I think that's going to really serve them well in the playoffs. So I really do think you're sort of kidding yourselves if you don't have them as a title contender at this point, just considering how dominant they've been in the regular season. And yeah, I don't see a world where they're not considered contenders. I know they, like you said, they have had some sort of bad moments in the playoffs, and they underperformed a little bit, but at the same time, I do view this as a new team with the jump Mobley's made and with Kenny Atkinson there, and then Garland getting back to that all-star level. I mean, like you said, this is a team with 3 all-stars, and in most cases, those teams are contenders. So I think most people would sort of agree on these 3, maybe not necessarily the order. Some people might have the Thunder, like you, as the title favorite. Some people might have the Celtics, like I did. Some people might even have the Cavs. But who is another team that you see as a clear contender in this tier, if there is any?
Yeah. There's one team, and I still can't believe they're being overlooked. It's the Pacers. The Pacers are amazing this year. I know they started off really poorly. And there were talks of them maybe trading Miles Turner at the deadline, and they got to make a change somewhere. But they've really turned it around really since about mid-December, and they've been one of the hottest teams in 2025. I think if you look at the stats, they're not as good as they were last year technically, but that's just because they had such a slow start to the year. They were dealing with injuries to Andrew Nembhard, dealing with injuries to Aaron Nesmith. But that team, like the Celtics, like the Cavaliers, and even like the Thunder, is really relying a lot on that natural progression and just kind of overall team chemistry. And I think everybody's really buying into their role. It's so funny to me because the Pacers were in the conference finals last year. Not even a year ago, they were in the conference finals, and they're even better than they were this year. They're a much more complete team than they were last year. They still have an elite offense, but they've improved drastically on defense. I think in the month of January, they were the 4th best defense in the entire NBA. So they've really figured it out on both sides of the ball. And we already know they're a tough playoff opponent as is, just because of their play style. I mean, I'm not going to go out and say that I think they're going to win the championship or anything, but I could totally see them making another deep playoff run.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't have them in my contenders tier. I did have them in that tier below at the puncher's chance tier. However, I think you brought up a lot of good points. And like you said, since mid-December and then specifically since the turn of the calendar, they've been really dominant and have one of the best records in the league. And I think when you look at some of the teams in the East, if they end up matching up with the Bucks, that's a team that they're pretty comfortable with, and we've seen them beat a lot of times. The Knicks, I definitely could see them beat in the first round as well. I think it's really hard for me to see them beat in a Celtics or a Cavs team, so that's what sort of held me back from moving them up a tier. But yeah, like you said, a really, really good team and very well-rounded. They have a lot of depth. And then the defensive improvement, as you mentioned, is really crucial. Fourth in defensive rating in the month of January is definitely legit. And I think Miles Turner definitely does play a big role in that, but then also Pascal Siakam. And we're really seeing Siakam and Halliburton develop more chemistry, which even in that conference finals run, I don't think was totally there, as they were sort of getting used to playing with each other. However, this season, I think we've seen that a lot more, and Halliburton has really bounced back from a slower start in the season, and he's really finding his groove again. So I think that's huge for this team. And yeah, I mean, the upside is certainly there with Halliburton and Siakam, who are two top 25 level players, and Halliburton could maybe even go up a level to a top 15 level guy, which we sort of saw during that NBA Cup run last season. So yeah, I definitely think that the Pacers aren't too far off from that tier, but I did just have them a little bit below in that puncher's chance category.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like another kind of important aspect when we talk about the Pacers is that, they were in the conference finals last year, gave Boston their tough run, and they weren't even fully healthy either because they didn't have Benedict Mathurin at all. And he's come back, and I mean, they moved him back to the bench now, but it's not really a demotion. It's just because they feel like he really thrives as kind of a leading scorer, which he can't be when he's in the starting lineup. When you add Benedict Mathurin to a team that's already arguably the best bench in the NBA, I mean, there's really not going to be a time in the game where they're going to be static. They're going to be a great team, I think, at all times. And I think that's part of the problem. They don't have that top tier talent that OKC, Boston, and Cleveland do. But I think they're a team that, maybe is just getting a little bit too overlooked. Like I said, I don't think they're going to win the championship or anything, but I think there's something special kind of going on in Indiana, especially because of how young they are. But I think they're going to be a team to keep an eye on from here on out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, the playoff experience factor with going to the conference finals is huge. And then getting a guy like Mathurin back this time around will definitely be massive for them. I'm really impressed with Mathurin this year. I think he's a great scorer, and he's sort of that classic six man. He gives them a lot of energy off the bench. So that's definitely a great point there. The last team I'm going to have in this tier of clear contenders is going to be the Denver Nuggets. I don't think you can count this team out, just considering how great Nikola Jokic is. I think this is a team in the West that's best suited to knock off the Thunder and upset them. They have a ton of playoff experience. They do still have pretty much that same core since the 2023 title run. Obviously, you did lose Bruce Brown and KCP from that 2023 title team. However, you mostly have the same core, so I do think that's really huge for them, just having that playoff experience. And Christian Brown has been really massive for them this year. Russell Westbrook was a great sign-in. I just don't think you can count a team led by Nikola Jokic out, and they have really been one of the best teams since the turn of the calendar year as well. So I think that's huge for them. This floor spacing is my biggest concern. They are one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league. However, they do shoot the three very efficiently, so I think that will sort of bode well for them in the playoffs, even if they're not shooting it at a high rate. Just how efficiently they shoot it will be massive, and then Nikola Jokic just creates so many open shots, whether it be threes or looks inside. I think that will sort of negate the three-point shooting concern as well. And defense is the other thing people like to bring up with this team as sort of a knock on them. However, when it matters the most, whether it be fourth quarter defense or playoff defense, we've seen this team rise to the occasion and really lock in on that end of the floor. And they do have a few solid defenders across the board, whether it be Aaron Gordon, who I think is a really good defender. Russell Westbrook has been playing some really good defense this year. Jokic, obviously not the best defender in the world, but he can be a serviceable defender in that regard when he needs to be. And then, yeah, you just sort of go down the line. I think this team has everything that is required to win a championship or at least make the finals. And Jamal Murray, since the start of the calendar year, has really been turning it up and getting back to his normal self after a really slow start. It was very concerning. However, just with him returning to that level of play, I have a lot of confidence in this Nuggets team, and we've seen him in the playoffs really improve his play and level up. So I think that also is a big factor for the Nuggets.
Yeah, the Nuggets, as long as they have Nikola Jokic, they're going to be a title contender. They are a very interesting team because, kind of like you mentioned, they're not a 3-point shooting threat, but they have guys that can be a threat from the outside. And it's so interesting to me to kind of see how that team is structured because it's not very, prototypical of kind of how the current NBA is, but they're still one of the top teams in the NBA. And that's not by accident. I think if it weren't for the Thunder, we would be talking about Denver going back to the NBA Finals again. I think pretty convincingly. I believe they've won 10 of their last 11 games or something along those lines. I mean, yeah, they're figuring it all out. I think at the perfect time. I think they are once again title contenders. I don't know if it's as clear that they're, kind of as dominating as they are compared to a couple seasons ago, but I can definitely see the Nuggets getting at least back to the conference finals once again. I think they're a team that, as long as they got Jokic and as long as they got essentially that same championship core, kind of like what you were talking about, I think they're going to be in those conversations again.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree there. Let's move on to the puncher's chance tier. We already talked about the Pacers, who are in my puncher's chance tier, and then you obviously had them in the contenders tier. Any other teams you got in this puncher's chance tier?
Yeah, I mean, I think another team to kind of address the elephant in the room is the Knicks. I feel like they're a team that I think they have a great roster on paper. And I know a lot of people kind of like to make the jokes about the Knicks trading 5 first-round picks to get Mikal Bridges and how that hasn't panned out for them. I'm not going to say they didn't overpay, but I still feel like the ideology was there. I mean, you get Mikal Bridges, who's a great two-way wing. You re-sign OG Anunoby, who really boosted that team last year after they acquired him from Toronto. And you get Karl Anthony Towns, who I know a lot of people questioned the fit when they got him, but he was an all-star starter this year. Even if it was kind of by default, he still earned that. And I feel like the Knicks do have a really good roster. My only concern with them, I think we've all seen that stat, is that they are, 0-7 against the top 3 teams in the NBA. I think they're a good team. I believe they're ranked as the 3rd best offense in the NBA right now, maybe 4th or at least higher up there. It's their defense that's kind of taken a step back, funny enough. And maybe once Mitchell Robinson comes back, they'll be more of a complete team again. But at least as it stands, I can't imagine them beating Boston or Cleveland in a 7-game series. And I mean, I already kind of said it. I even think Indiana has a better chance of making it to the finals than they do. But there's still a lot of basketball left. But just as it stands, I can't imagine them winning a title this year.
Yeah, for sure. I think you really hit on everything. The 0-7 record against top 3 teams is really detrimental to them, and I think we might view them differently if they'd won at least 2 or 3 of those games. But at the same time, they've really looked awful in all of those games, too. They haven't really been close with any of these teams. And I think it really does go to show, although you do have Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, who are really good defenders, the front end and the back end defense with Karl Anthony Towns and Jalen Brunson is a big problem. But to your point about Mitchell Robinson, I do think he's going to make a huge impact, and I could maybe even see him inserted into the starting lineup over Josh Hart, and then having those double big lineups with Towns, as we saw with Gobert in Minnesota. He really thrives next to a more defensive-minded center. So I think that could be a big impact for them, and it could definitely help their defense as well. So I don't think you can completely count them out just because we haven't seen them at full strength just yet. But at the same time, I do think it's beyond unlikely that they could beat a Boston or a Cleveland in the playoffs. I just don't see it this year. I think they're probably a year away, and I think that's all right. Just considering all the moves they made, a lot of times you're not going to win the title or contend for the title first year with a new core. However, long term, I still do really like this team, and I do think they could move up a tier maybe next year, but this year I really don't see it from the Knicks.
You kind of hit the nail on the head. I agree.
All right, next team, I think we should probably talk about the Lakers. I'm going to have them in puncher's chance. I don't know if that's where you had them, but I think when you have Luka Doncic and LeBron James, you just can't count that team out. Simple as that. It's top 10 level guys. Luka's top 3, top 5 in the league. LeBron at 40 years old is still playing at an incredibly high level. And then we did see them pick up a huge win against the Denver Nuggets last week, and I think that really showed me a lot about this team. I almost had them in the contenders tier. I think they're probably the closest of the 3 teams we've talked about to that tier, for me at least. But I mean, this is a team that really does lack a true center. We obviously saw them try to go out and get Mark Williams at the deadline. That didn't work out because of medical reasons. He did fail his physical, and that whole story is crazy. But regardless, in the playoffs, I do think that lack of rim protection will hurt them. I think Jackson Hayes just isn't really going to cut it, unfortunately. He's a solid backup big, but having him as your starting center is really challenging, especially against some of the other teams in the West, whether it be the Nuggets or the Thunder, who do have a lot of front court size. But at the same time, I do really like how versatile this defense is. I think the Dorian Finney-Smith pickup was huge. We saw him make a huge impact both against the Mavericks and the Nuggets in recent games. So I do think that's big for them. And then Rui Hachimura has really stepped up defensively as well. So I do think just having guys like that, and then Luka and LeBron positionally have really great size as well. So they're not an incredibly small team. They just sort of lack that traditional big, which I think will hurt them. But at the same time, like I said, I just don't think you can count out a team with Luka and LeBron.
Yeah. The big man depth, or not even the depth, just not really having a true center is something I factored in. But it kind of feels like you're nitpicking at that point when they've got LeBron James and Luka Doncic on the same team. I still can't believe that's real life, but that's kind of where we are. I feel like so when I did my tier list, I actually did have them in clear contenders. I just feel like we obviously know what LeBron's capable of. We obviously know what Luka's capable of. And early on, I mean, they've gelled a lot better than I thought they would short term. I knew this was going to be a good trade for the long term, but my concern when they made the deal for Luka was chemistry going to be an issue? Were they going to have a hard time kind of defining roles? But so far, it hasn't really seemed to be a problem. I think they are, when it's all said and done, probably going to be like a top 3 team in the West in the standings. I think that team is just way too good because of what they can provide with LeBron and Luka. And I feel like another thing that really stood out to me, just in terms of kind of the roster makeup, is LeBron and Luka are 2 of the most motivated players to win a championship. Obviously, everybody who plays in the NBA wants to win a championship, but those 2 specifically really have kind of like that fight for it, because LeBron, he wants to win his 5th in his career and tie Kobe and be one step closer to Jordan and all of that. And he wants to end his career with one more championship, whereas Luka, he lost last year, lost to the conference in the conference finals a couple years ago. Obviously, everything going down with Dallas, where they basically outright said they can't win a championship with him as their leader. I think those 2 guys are more motivated than probably anybody in the NBA. At least they're up there. And I think when the playoffs come around and seeding doesn't really matter anymore, I wouldn't be surprised if, at least they make it to the conference finals again.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that run from them. I think it definitely does depend a little bit on matchups, but at the same time, I do think this is a really talented team. And to your point, Luka and LeBron have really meshed better than I thought to start. And just seeing them pick up a big win against the Nuggets definitely changed my view on them a little bit. And yeah, I'm very close to having them in that contenders tier. I could be definitely talked into that. I might even move them up before we wrap up the podcast. But yeah, they're right there for me. I just have them just a notch below, sort of. I think the other teams above them are just a little bit more well-rounded, but nevertheless, this is just an incredibly stacked team, and it is just crazy that Luka and LeBron are on the same team, and playmaking, the high IQ play there is just, it's really off the charts, and just how they're able to make an all-around impact as well. It's really crazy, and I think LeBron playing off the ball these last few years as he's gotten older has really helped him adjust to playing with Luka. I think they would have always sort of figured it out just because they're so talented, but this is really the perfect time in LeBron's career to have him playing next to a guy like Luka, and they really meshed well together. So yeah, I'm really close to having them in that next tier. But yeah, any other teams you got in this puncher's chance tier?
I mean, I feel like another team we got to at least talk about is Memphis. Memphis is, I think, as of today, the 2nd seed in the West. They've kind of been going back and forth with Denver. They're a team that I think a lot of people kind of forgot about because of how last year went, where they had injuries. I mean, Ja Morant, I believe, only played 9 games because of his injury and the suspension he had. And I think a lot of people just kind of forgot about how good that team really is. But the Grizzlies are another team that just kind of can do it on both sides of the ball. Now that Victor Wembanyama is out for the season, Jaren Jackson Jr. is the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year again. I just feel like at the very least, they're a team that could make a run in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to make the NBA Finals. I guess I just feel like we haven't seen enough from them in the playoffs to justify saying, yeah, they can make it to the NBA Finals as soon as this year. They have a great team. They're very, very talented. I'm a big believer in Ja Morant. I know some people aren't, but I just don't view them in the same category as OKC, Denver, and LA.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is definitely the hardest team for me to place. I could kind of see the playoffs going any way for them. I could see them sort of getting upset by maybe like a Minnesota or Golden State in the first round, but then I could also see them going on a run and making the conference finals. This is a team that's probably the deepest team in the league. And I do think obviously in the playoffs rotations shorten up a little bit, but just based on how they're sort of a scoring by committee team, I do think that depth will help them because not all of those players are necessarily going to maintain their level of play in the playoffs from the regular season. However, I think they have so many players throughout their roster that at least a few of them will, and they'll be able to maintain that level of offense. And then the jump that Jaren Jackson has taken offensively, you mentioned that he's the leader for Depoy again with Wemby out. But his offensive jump has really been special. He's been that number one option for them most of the year, with Ja sort of being in and out of the lineups at times, and also just not totally being the same offensive player, which is understandable because he is coming off an injury. But at the same time, I think that really does bode well for them. And just having two number one option guys is an advantage for them in some ways. And yeah, I think they're definitely a dangerous team in the playoffs in some ways, but I really don't know how it's going to play out for them. I think it definitely does depend on matchups. I could really see it going any way for them. I think they do have a ton of talent, though, and as you mentioned, a lot of balance. They're a really good offense and a really good defense. Jalen Wells has been one of the best rookies in this class, arguably Rookie of the Year at this point. So I think he's going to be a guy that's going to sort of maintain that level of play in the playoffs. He just seems like a really steady player to me. Then Desmond Bane, he started the season off a little bit slow, but he's really bounced back toward the start of the calendar year. And he's a really solid third option for them in the playoffs. And then just you can run down the roster. I mean, Santi Aldama, Scottie Pippen Jr., Brandon Clark. I mean, this team's really loaded with talent. You know, Gigi Jackson, Vince Williams, Luke Kennard. I mean, they really have just a ton of guys. And we haven't seen a lot of teams like that make deep runs, but at the same time, it's certainly possible, especially if injuries are a factor. This is a team that can really overcome injuries, or if another team's injured, they can really sort of thrive off that just because they have so many guys throughout the roster. So I definitely think they have a chance. I would have them sort of at the lower end of this puncher's chance tier. However, I definitely think they still belong within this group because you really can't totally count them out in the playoffs. Any other teams you want to talk about in this tier?
A team that still kind of confuses me is Houston. I don't know how to feel about Houston. I feel like because they were the number 2 seed for a little bit, but I believe they're down to 4 or 5 now in the West. They're number 4 in the West now, but they're only half game above the Lakers. Ime Udoka has got them playing very hard, and I think they've really kind of figured out how to play Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. I know that was a big concern for a lot of people. I don't think they're going to make a championship run or anything like that. I don't think they're going to make it to the Western Conference Finals. I guess they're more so just a team that I know can be really successful, and I know that they're a team to kind of keep an eye on. But where exactly they rank among the rest of the playoff contenders, I mean, I could put them anywhere from puncher's chance down to pretenders. And it's just kind of, they're one of the toughest teams, I think, to rank because we've seen them on both sides of it where they can be really good. They could be kind of borderline dominant, especially with the huge jump we're seeing out of Amen Thompson. But we've also seen it where we're kind of reminded that, you know, this team didn't even make the postseason last year. So they're a really hard team to rank, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely had a tough time with them. ultimately ended up going with the some upside. I do think they could
Sure.
win first round matchup, but I think that's sort of their ceiling. I couldn't even see them making a conference finals run. I just think they're a little bit too young, and they don't have really enough scoring to go around. Jalen Green is a very talented scorer, but he's certainly inconsistent. Şengün is more of that playmaker, rebounder type. He is a solid interior scorer as well, but at the same time, he's not necessarily a number one option guy. Amen Thompson looks like he could be on that track, but he's only a second-year player, and he's really like we've only seen this jump from him since the start of the new year, so it's really tough for me to imagine them making a deep run. And to your point, they didn't make the playoffs last year. It's really rare to see teams this young with this little experience make any sort of playoff run. They're having a great season, and it's an awesome story. I really love watching them play, but I'm likely going to pick them to lose in the first round. I could, depending on the matchup, see them winning that first round series. But outside of that, I don't see them having a chance at like the conference finals or the championship or anything. I think they still are actually one of the top 3 defenses in the leagues. There's definitely that upside, and I do think that these could sort of thrive in a playoff setting in some ways just because they're so gritty and they can sort of muck up the game a little bit. And Ime Udoka is a terrific coach, so I definitely think they're going to be a tough out. But at the same time, playoff-wise, I'm just not too high on them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree.
And then Warriors is another team I want to talk about. I don't know where you had them, but I did have them in this puncher's chance tier. I think we saw with the Jimmy Butler acquisition so far, it's really worked out nicely. They're 6-1 with Butler. He really just takes a lot of the pressure off Curry. I mean, beginning of the year, the Warriors did start off really strong, and then toward the middle, they just plummeted down the standings, and they were even outside the play-in for a little bit. But with Butler, I think he just really changes everything. We're seeing Curry averaging close to 30 points a game with Butler in the lineup, and they've just looked dominant. They've had some really quality wins as well. With Curry and Draymond, obviously, 4-time champions, this is a team you just can't completely rule out. I really do think it's matchup dependent for them, like so many teams, but at the same time in the playoffs, I can certainly see them pulling off a first-round upset. Definitely depends on seeding. If they're going up against OKC, I don't like their chances at all, but if they're going up against a team like Memphis or Houston or even LA, I could see them pulling off an upset there for sure. And yeah, I just don't think you can count out a team with this much playoff experience. And then Jimmy Butler, we've seen, is one of the best playoff risers, frankly, of all time. I mean, we saw that crazy 2023 run, and he's not afraid of the moment at all. And he's an excellent shot creator. He's a two-way player. He really does it all. And I've been really impressed with him so far. I was a little bit concerned just with how he finished with the Heat. And over the last season and a half, he really wasn't super available. He was in and out of the lineup all the time, but he's really bought into this Warriors team so far. And I think this is a team you just don't want to count out. I think they're going to have a chip on their shoulder. And Butler's proven that it doesn't matter what seed he is, he can always make a deep playoff run. Steph Curry, to me, is still a top 10 player in the league. I think people have sort of forgotten about his greatness based off a slower start to the season. But with Butler, it really changes everything. And I think it really, like I said, takes the pressure off him in many ways. And the thing is, I think it's really hard for a guy like Curry at his age to really carry a team without a secondary creator next to him. And I think that really gets forgotten about. I mean, he was in one of the most difficult positions in the league, just not having that consistent creator next to him. I think that really did hurt him toward the beginning of the year. But yeah, I really do like this Butler fit, and I just don't think you can count them out in the playoffs. And then they do also have a good amount of depth with some of their younger guys like a Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, Brandon Bozemski. I mean, you can go down the line. They have a lot of depth. I think they've improved their center core as well with Trace Jackson Davis. Kevon Looney's still there. He's really solid. Quentin Post has looked like a solid rookie. So I think this team does check a lot of boxes. I can't put them in the contender list just yet, but I can definitely see this team rising up the standings and finishing outside of those play-in seeds, maybe finishing as a 6 seed, something like that, and then being a really tough out in the playoffs.
Yeah, I feel like you pretty much hit it on the head perfectly. I think you brought up a really good point about it's not even so much the team itself, it's who they're going to be going up against. Because if season ended today, and we're just going to assume Golden State keeps the 8 seed, they're facing OKC in the first round. And I don't see them being OKC. I mean, I don't see any team in the West beating OKC. can't imagine that if it comes down to that and it is OKC and Golden State, that Golden State can kind of pull off that upset. But I'm a big fan of the Jimmy Butler acquisition. When the whole trade saga kind of started, where we all knew he was going to go, we just didn't know where he was going. I thought Golden State made perfect sense for him because he can provide a lot on both sides of the ball. He's not, like a 25 points per game scorer anymore, but he can still provide some scoring alongside Stephen Curry. And Jimmy Butler as the second best player on the team, that's a pretty good formula. I feel like the Warriors have a good team, but they have so much ground to make up that they're not going to make a major jump in the standings, I think, from here on out. And if they do kind of fall into that play-in category, I mean, I don't see them beating OKC in a playoff series. I don't see them beating Denver, and I don't even see them beating the Lakers, to be honest with you. Obviously, it kind of depends on how things change from now until the end of the season. But that's kind of where I fall on the Warriors. I thought the Jimmy Butler trade was really good for them. They had to get somebody, and I think Jimmy Butler was a good guy to get. But when you compare them to the rest of the West, I just don't see them making a run this year. Maybe next year, but not right now.
Yeah, no, that's definitely understandable for sure. So did you have them that puncher's chance tier, or did you have them in just some upside tier?
I have them in that puncher's chance. I have them there too.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, I don't think this is a team you can totally count out. Was there any other teams you had in this puncher's chance tier, or do you want to move on to just some upside?
Uh, I think we can just move on to some upside.
Okay. Any team you want to start with there?
Yeah, I mean, let's just go in order. I think Milwaukee is another very interesting team because at the trade deadline, they traded Chris Middleton to Washington for Kyle Kuzma. I saw very mixed opinions about that trade because on one hand, even though Chris Middleton is not the same guy he was when they won a title a few years ago, he's still very dependable, still very reliable, at least when he's on the court. I think that's part of the main problem. He can't really stay healthy too much anymore. But on top of that, Kyle Kuzma is kind of a questionable fit on that team, especially because it kind of feels like in some cases it's just a little bit of a lateral move. Obviously, they get younger going from Chris Middleton to Kyle Kuzma, but I think the jury's still kind of out on that trade. I think as more time goes on, we'll kind of see how they gel together. And on top of that, the Bobby Portis suspension I think is huge. Bobby Portis isn't Giannis level valuable, but he's still a very valuable piece of that team. He finished, I think top 10 in Sixth Man of the Year voting in back-to-back years, was probably going to have another really good end to the season at this point. So I think it's going to be a problem for them to kind of gel when they have Bobby Portis out and they're just kind of dealing with everything that they're dealing with. And on top of that, they're in danger of falling to, I think, the 6th seed pretty soon in the East. And obviously, as long as you have Giannis, who's playing like an MVP candidate this season, you can't really rule them out. But I'm also not going to sit here and tell you that I think they have a realistic shot of winning a championship this year.
Yeah, for sure. I think you summed it up pretty nicely. I can't completely count them out just because of Giannis and Dame, but at the same time, I really don't love their supporting cast. And yeah, that just sort of did them for that a little bit. And then the playoffs, obviously Giannis has been injured these last 2 seasons, but just seeing them as first round exits these last 2 years, it doesn't really bode well for them at all. I could move them up to the puncher's chance tier, but I honestly do like all the teams above them. But they're right there in between those 2 tiers for me. But yeah, I definitely have a hard time imagining them winning more than one first round matchup. I think maybe they could be Pacers or Knicks team, but I would still probably favor those 2 teams in a playoff matchup over them, honestly. And yeah, I don't know where they go from here. I could see them potentially trading Giannis. We did see that Shams report earlier this week that said if the Bucks have another playoff first round exit, then Giannis could be on the move. So I definitely think that's something to monitor, and that's sort of been a cloud over their season all year. So that definitely concerns me. But yeah, I don't see this team having a ton of upside, but at the same time, you can't totally count them out with a guy like Giannis, who's one of the best players in the league and has shown to be an elite playoff performer for sure. So it's definitely tough. And then when you look at a second round matchup with potentially the Cavs, which looks the most likely at this point, or the Celtics, I don't really see them having much of a chance.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it perfectly. I can't. it's not even so much that I think they're a bad team or anything. It's just I do think the teams above them are just that much more dangerous in the playoffs.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do think the West is a little more open in that regard, other than
And
necessarily the Thunder. There's a lot of teams where you can sort of talk yourself into like, oh, maybe the Grizzlies make a run, maybe the Warriors, just sort of depends on the matchups and how the rest of the season plays out. But with the East, I think it's a little bit more clear. The Celtics and Cavs are just head and shoulders above everyone. And then, yeah, next team you want to talk about? Do you want to go Pistons next?
yeah, let's give some Detroit some recognition. So they're on an 8-game winning streak right now,
Yeah.
which is pretty insane. I know a lot of us. I think the consensus was this team is going to be way better than they were last year. Not that that was a difficult challenge for them, but I think we all kind of knew that they were going to be better, maybe be a play-in team. I don't think anybody, even Pistons fans, probably expected them to be this good. We've seen a a pretty big jump out of Cade Cunningham, who made the All-Star game this year. Malik Beasley and Tobias Harris were some solid acquisitions they had in the offseason. And obviously, JB Bickerstaff becoming their head coach has clearly had a positive effect on them. They're a fun team. They're a young team. And I mean, I feel like we have to give them that love for them to be as good as they are while not making a lot of offseason changes. Obviously, they made some, but I'm saying the ones they made, it's not like they went out and got, LeBron James. Like they made pretty minimal moves in the grand scheme of it. But they're looking like they're basically guaranteed a playoff spot right now. I don't see them winning a championship, and I think ultimately that's what this comes down to. I don't even see them really making it past the first round. But I feel like they're playing some really good basketball right now, and I'm intrigued to see how far they can take it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Cade Cunningham's just playing at such an elite level right now. And then to your point about bringing in Malik Beasley and Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr. for the floor space, and that's been crucial. And JB Bickerstaff's really doing an incredible job. We're seeing him as just an elite culture builder once again. We saw him do it with Cleveland and now Detroit. Playoff-wise, it's definitely going to be tough. I could see them maybe pulling off a crazy first-round upset, but at the same time, I would sort of assume they're going to be a first-round exit. So I might have them in the pretenders tier, but at the same time, for a team that won 14 games last year, that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is just it's a great story, and they have a really bright future with Cade, and then all the young guys have really impressed me as well. Asar Thompson, John Holland, and it's crazy. Like they definitely have a lot of young talent, and they're really sustaining their success without Jaden Ivey, which has been super impressive. When he went down, sort of got worried that they might fall back into that like 10, 11 seed range, but they've even gotten better, and now they're secured a playoff spot, and they could even rise up to a 4 or 5 seed potentially. They're not too far back on this 8-game win streak. But yeah, I do have a tough time imagining them winning their first playoff series together as a core. Nevertheless, awesome story.
Definitely. To just kind of add another fun fact, I guess, I think the last time they won a playoff game was 2008. I believe it was something like that because they made the playoffs 2 years. It was 2016, but they got swept. And there was another year, but they got swept that year too. So they haven't won a playoff game since 2008. And I believe they made it to the conference finals against Boston, if I'm remembering that part right.
I think
So they haven't won a playoff game since then. So I think that at least will be broken this year. I think that trend will at least stop. Even if they don't win a series, I do think they're good enough to at least get a game or two. But I think they're going to be a fun team to keep an eye on for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Moving on to the Clippers, this has been another team that's been a surprising team to me. I thought they would be outside of the play-in picture without Paul George, and I didn't see them upgrade their roster in any significant ways. Obviously, they did bring in Derrick Jones Jr. However, Norman Powell, the age of 31, has had one of the craziest seasons in the league, most improved season. I think he should win that award. I don't know if he will, unfortunately, but nevertheless, I mean, he's having an incredible season, and he's taken on that scoring responsibility in a massive way. Kawhi Leonard hasn't totally looked like himself since returning, but in a playoff setting, just having a guy with that much experience is huge. And he has shown, even if he hasn't been fully healthy in the regular season, that he can still perform at a high level in the playoffs when healthy. And then James Harden is having a really solid season as well. Definitely something that surprised me, just how he's able to maintain his level of play at this age, but he's been awesome. He's been really good playmaker, and he sort of orchestrated the whole offense. And then the big story to me is just how good this defense has been. Top 5 defense. You look at this roster, and it really doesn't make much sense. But I think Jeff Van Gundy, as the assistant coach, deserves a ton of credit. And this is, another awesome story. I don't know how I feel about them in the playoffs necessarily. Maybe they could win a first round matchup just with Harden, and then if Kawhi gets back to full strength. But I would say likely first round exit. How do you feel about this team?
The Clippers are a very weird team because when it was announced that Kawhi was going to miss however many games he did to start the year, people were talking about how, they don't even have their own first round pick this year because it goes to OKC. And now they're in the playoff picture. I just had their record up. They're 6 games above 500, and they've played most of the season without Kawhi Leonard. He's only played 17 games this season. And I think you kind of mentioned it. Yeah, Kawhi right now isn't, Kawhi Leonard, the one that we've all come to know. But the fact that they can still be this good and surpass all expectations while not even having their best player, I'm still going to put them in the pretender tier. But I just feel like that's something we have to keep in mind. The fact that they've exceeded all these expectations and Kawhi Leonard hasn't even played half the games. So, do I think Norman Powell can put up these numbers in the playoffs? I don't think so. But if he's putting them up in the regular season, I guess what's stopping him from doing it in the playoffs? So I don't think they're going to get out of the first round, but I do think they're a team to keep in mind for that reason.
Absolutely. I do think the West is really so stacked that it's going to be tough for them. I don't think they're necessarily a terrible team for that reason or anything, but I just have a hard time imagining them win a first round series just with how good some of these West teams are. But like we said, I think just an awesome story overall. And let's move on to the Orlando Magic, who have been really odd team because when you look at this team, they had their 2 best players, Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, injured for an extended period of time, and they were a top 5 seed during that stretch. However, when they returned, they haven't really been too good, and Paolo specifically has struggled a little bit since returning, and they've fallen all the way down to the 7 seed in the East right now, which is just kind of insane. So I don't really know what to make of this team. I ultimately going to have them as pretenders. I think until they upgrade their floor spacing, their offense is just not going to be good enough to win a playoff series, honestly. We did see them go toe-to-toe with the Cavs last year, took them to 7 games, but I understand the defense is great. I just have some serious questions about their offense and just especially their floor spacing. I think that's really going to hurt them in the playoffs. I think they're probably a year away or a piece away from really making a strong playoff push. Ultimately, I could see them jumping up next year to that contender status. I'm very high on Paolo and Franz still, even though they've struggled a little bit this year. But I definitely have a hard time seeing this team win a playoff series, especially where they are right now, where they're likely going to draw the Cavs or the Celtics in the first round. If they're playing the Knicks, I think that might be a little bit of a different story, and I could move them up. But as it looks right now, they are going to be playing the Cavs or Celtics. So I have a hard time seeing them doing much in the playoffs.
Yeah, Orlando's a team that I was also pretty high on entering the year. Obviously, Paolo got injured, 4 or 5 games in? So, that's just kind of a tough break for them. It's so weird to me, though, because it was almost like they were playing better when their 2 best players were out. And it's just, obviously, I don't think they're better without them on the court, but I just think that's kind of wild to think about. I think you mentioned it. I mean, they have an elite defense. I think their defense is legit. And I'm a big believer in Paolo Banchero. I think he's going to be, if he's not already, he's going to be a star in the NBA. But this season, at least, their playoff run all lies on him. And ultimately, I just don't think he's at that level yet where he can basically carry a team past the first round. He came close last year, but obviously he didn't do it. He ended up losing to Cleveland in 7 games in the first round. Well, the Magic did. With how they've been playing for really the second half of the season, I just don't see them making it past the first round. I do think it's important to note that they've been without Jalen Suggs for a little bit, and they still don't. The last update we got is that they're still not 100% sure he's going to come back before the regular season. I think if he does come back, maybe we could put them up to some upside, maybe. But I think as it stands, they're probably looking like first round exits again.
Yeah, for sure. I think you did bring up a good point there with Jalen Suggs. It just does go to show how valuable he is to this team, especially as that facilitator type role and as a floor spacer because he's really improved his shooting. So yeah, he definitely provides a lot of value and he's an excellent defender as well. So like you said, I do think maybe they could move up to the upside tier once he returns, but for now I'm gonna have to have them as pretenders. Now let's go to the Timberwolves. This is another really weird team. They made the big trade for Julius Randle. Hasn't totally worked out, but in recent weeks with Randle sidelined, Naz Reid has been in the starting lineup and he's been really awesome for them and they've sort of put together an impressive stretch. They had that crazy comeback against the Thunder. They obviously had a deep run last year going to the conference finals. Right now they're the 7th seed in the West though, and this is a tough team to sort of fit into these tiers. I'm going to have to say some upside just because of their playoff experience and how great Edwards is. And then I do think if Naz Reid stays in the starting lineup, they do have a little bit more potential in the playoffs. I just think he's a much better fit as a shooter next to Edwards, and he does provide a lot of ball handling and playmaking as well, which is really fun to watch, just considering his size. But at the same time, it's really rough. Rudy Gobert is also taking a little bit of a step back, and Mike Conley isn't the same player, so they're really dependent on Ant to do a lot more than last year. But at the same time, he's a really special player who's proven he can rise to the occasion on the playoffs, so I can't completely rule them out. And like with many of these teams, I do think it depends on the matchup. I could certainly see them pulling off a first-round upset depending on where they end up seeding-wise.
Yeah, Minnesota's a really weird team because I know a lot of people are talking about the Karl Anthony Towns trade, and rightfully so. I do think that's probably the biggest reason that they've really taken a step back this year. But another name that I kind of just want to throw out was Kyle Anderson. I feel like people kind of overlooked his departure. He ended up signing with Golden State, and then he got traded. I believe he's in Miami now. I think he was part of that Jimmy Butler deal. But I think people kind of forgot how important he was to that team last year. I'm not going to pretend like, he's the reason that the Timberwolves aren't as good as they were last year, but I think it's pretty clear that they kind of miss having a guy like that around. And I mean, as long as you have Anthony Edwards, I think you have to put them in some upside. I feel like he's a top player in the NBA for a reason. And we did see how far they went last year, where not even just that they made the conference finals, but I think most people expected them to make it to the NBA finals. Obviously, they lost to Dallas in the conference finals in 5, but I think a lot of people know how good this Timberwolves team can be. They just haven't been that, and I just think it's too late for them to turn it around and make a serious playoff run.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you brought up a good point there with Anderson. He was just a really good presence for them off the bench, and just having that veteran around was really crucial for them. So that's definitely another factor. And there's a lot going on there, but yeah, I think you definitely hit on everything there. Let's move on to the Miami Heat, who have proven to be a dangerous team in the playoffs. Obviously, with that crazy 2023 run, but I don't know if this team really adds it in them at all. Especially sort of similar to the Magic, they're likely going to match up with the Celtics or Cavs, who are just far, far better than them.
Yeah, listen, I know I'm a Celtics fan, and I know it's just going to sound like I'm hating, but I cannot. I'm going to go as far as to say I don't even think Miami's going to make the playoffs. I think they might even just lose in the play-in. I just don't think now that they don't have Jimmy Butler, and it is weird because Jimmy Butler, in theory, didn't really play for them this season, for the most part. And technically, they got better because they had a guy who wasn't really playing, traded him, and then landed Kyle Anderson, who we were just talking about, and Andrew Wiggins. But they are, I think, 2-6 since trading Jimmy Butler. It was already a stretch that they were going to be, a legitimate playoff contender. I think after the Jimmy Butler trade, it's an even bigger stretch than it was before. And I mean, as long as you got Eric Spoelstra as your head coach, I mean, I've counted the Heat out multiple times over the last 10 years, and they've proven me wrong multiple times. So as long as you got Eric Spoelstra, I think, leading the way, they might be a playoff contender. But just this team as it stands right now, even though we've seen a huge jump from Tyler Hero, who also made his first ever All-Star appearance this season, even with that, I just don't see the Heat making any noise in the playoffs, especially, like you said, if they face Boston or Cleveland or somebody like that in the first round.
Yeah, for sure. I think you really nailed it there. I could definitely see the Hawks upsetting them in the play-in. So who knows if they even make the playoffs at this point. But yeah, I've been a little bit disappointed with them post Butler. I thought Wiggins was going to be a lot better for them, and I thought they were sort of able to maintain a 6 or 7 seed at least, but they've really kind of fallen down the standings. And I think the big piece for me is, well, Tyler Hero has taken a jump. Bam Adebayo's really taken a step back, and he hasn't been very aggressive on offense or efficient. So I think that's a huge problem for them. He hasn't even really looked like a second option level player. So I think that's really detrimental to them, especially in a playoff setting when you're really counting on Tyler Hero for your shot creation and scoring. I think you need a little bit more than that. And then with Wiggins not fitting in great so far, I think that's a little bit of a problem. Then you look at their point guard play. I mean, Terry Rozier has almost fallen out of their rotation. He's really not getting a ton of minutes. Davion Mitchell has been a solid pickup for them at the deadline, but at the same time, I just don't think this team has enough. They don't have a ton of depth either. I mean, who knows? Maybe they'll make the 8 seed and maybe they'll win a game in the first round or something, but definitely a first round exit if they even make it. So kind of clear pretenders to us. So yeah, let's move on to the last team, Mavericks, who are technically outside of the playoffs right now. However, I mean, they still do have a good amount of talent when they're healthy. Obviously, they made the big trade for Anthony Davis. I don't know why Luka at the trade deadline, which was just so absurd, as we talked about earlier. With Davis and Kyrie there, I don't think this is a team that you can totally count out. I could maybe be talked into them being as pretenders just because they've had so many injuries, and it might be challenging for them to make the playoffs in the West with how many great teams there are. But I don't know. I mean, if things go right, maybe they can win a first round matchup. I do like this team in theory in some ways. Kyrie with a bunch of really good defenders around him, both on the wing and specifically in the interior when they're healthy. But it's also really awful that Anthony Davis got injured during his first game with the Mavericks, and then Gafford goes down with an injury. Lively's been out. I think that sort of is difficult for them. So I don't know if they can be in this upside conversation this year even.
Yeah, the Mavericks are a really weird team to rank. Let's take, like, if we take the Luka trade out of it, which I know is kind of insane to say, but if you just look at the team as is, I mean, they have a good roster. I know it's not 2016 anymore, but Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis on the same team is still, that's not nothing. You know, that's still something to keep in mind. I know Klay Thompson's not the same guy he was even 2 or 3 years ago, but he still provides some value on both sides of the ball. And he obviously has that championship experience. My main concern about Dallas this season is obviously the injuries, not just Anthony Davis, but to Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford is still out. My main concern is, are they going to be able to gel before the playoffs come around? And because that's a weird situation for them to be in, where you have 3 or 4 legitimate big man options that are all essentially coming back around the same time. Who knows how late in the season? I mean, I just feel like the talent is there, and I'm not going to get into whether the Luka trade was the right call or not. But Anthony Davis is still a great player. We're talking one of the best players in the NBA. Having him out is huge, and having him come back will really boost that team. But do I think they can make any type of run this season? It wouldn't surprise me, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, no, I think you brought up some really good points there, and I think your point about this team gelling together is really crucial because Anthony Davis, he might be able to come back at some point in March, but I just don't think that's enough time to really develop the chemistry with Kyrie and the rest of the group. And then it's going to be a real uphill battle for them seeding wise in the West. They're definitely going to be in the play-in. And then likely, I mean, if they make the playoffs, maybe they face like a team like OKC. It's definitely going to be an uphill battle for them. But yeah, like you said, I don't think you can totally count out this team when they're fully healthy. But yeah, definitely a hard team to rank. Did you end up having them as pretenders or upside?
I had them, or in upside, I have them in that tier, but it was one of those, I'm kind of banking on Anthony Davis coming back and being Anthony Davis. But it also goes back to the seeding because I mean, I don't think they're going to make any sort of jump in the standings from now until the end of the season. And if they face a team like OKC or Denver in the first round, I mean, I would have a really hard time picturing Dallas making it past the first round, to be honest. They still have a lot of talent, and I think now that Luka's gone, we're really going to see what Kyrie Irving can do on his own team again, or as kind of a bigger guy than he was before. But I just can't picture a world where they make it back to the NBA Finals or anything like that. At least
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely agree with you there. I think it was sort of in between just total pretenders or upside, but I think just when this team's healthy with Anthony Davis and Kyrie, you have to sort of give them that respect and put them in that upside category. But yeah, really difficult position for them. And yeah, moving forward, I do think maybe they could be sort of more so contenders, but this year I just don't see it. I think this has sort of been the season from hell for them in many ways. And yeah, just a really weird team overall, but hypothetically with Davis and Gafford and Lively back, I'm really high on that team, especially interior defense wise. I think that's one of the best interior defenses in the league. That big man rotation could really be something special at some point, but it's going to be tough to really make a run with just the lack of court time they've had and seeding wise. So yeah, just overall a weird situation for sure. All right, so I think we had a very similar list. The only thing you would have changed was having the Thunder as your title favorite and then Celtics as clear contenders. You would have moved up the Pacers. And then is that it?
so. I mean, the Thunder Celtics one is kind of like, my NBA fan says it's the Celtics as title favorites, but the Celtics fan in me says it's OKC. I can't be wrong either way. Indy, I would move Indy up to clear contenders. I just think they are better than they were last year. They're already a really tough playoff opponent in a conference that is still, at least past the top two teams, still kind of open. I mean, I could see a world where they jump up to the 3 seed. It's going to be difficult, but I could see that happening. They've been on a tear recently, and I just think there's a lot going well for them. And then I would maybe, huge emphasis on maybe, move the Lakers up to clear contenders, but I just feel like we haven't seen enough of LeBron and Luka together yet to convincingly make that call. But it wouldn't surprise me if they make another run. You have two of the best players in the NBA coming together and joining forces. I mean, that's going to be dangerous no matter who you're up against. So those are really the only changes I think I might make. But I feel like the rest of the tier list looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, Lakers is definitely a tough one. Like you said, I just need to see a little bit more, but I could definitely see by the end of the season moving them up to clear contenders, or I could even be convinced right now that they're clear contenders just because of Luka and LeBron, and that's just such an elite duo. But for now, I'm just going to have them just a notch below, but definitely above the teams in the puncher's chance tier, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think this was a fun list. We definitely agreed on most of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm super excited to see how the rest of the season shakes out in the playoffs. So right now, you're going Thunder Celtics for the finals, I assume.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna have to end with a little bit of a bold prediction for me. I'm gonna have the Nuggets coming out of the West. I'm gonna sort of stamp that right now. I did discuss it a little earlier. I do think this team's just really well suited, especially in a playoff setting. I think with the NBA, you sort of have to expect the unexpected. I think everyone's sort of thinking Thunder Celtics is the finals, sort of like last year. Everyone thought Nuggets Celtics was going to be the finals, and it ends up being Celtics Mavs. But I think the Nuggets are really going to surprise some people. I just think you can't count out Jokic, and I think that this core really has it all, and I really do value that playoff experience factor. So that's sort of my bold prediction that I'm going to end on. But yeah, I had a lot of fun with this episode and this tier list, and yeah, it was a great time for sure. I'm happy to have you on the show.
Man, I appreciate you having me on. It was definitely a fun time for me too.
Yeah, no, for sure. So before we head out, do you want to plug any of your work? I know that you write for a bunch of different.
Yeah. So you can find this is my name down here. I don't know if it's going to show like that on the video, but my name is Elie Deglaoui. You can find me on lastwordonsports.com. I cover NBA news and rumors. You can find me on Fansided's 8 points, 9 seconds website. That's the site for the Indiana Pacers. I'm the site expert, so you can catch my work there. And I also work for Athlon Sports. I write for the Celtics, the Lakers, the Nets, and the Grizzlies. So you can catch all my work there. It's all kind of news and rumors based for the most part, but I always try to give my 2 cents. You can follow me on social media. Everything's under just my name, Elie Deglaoui. So if you ever wanted to talk basketball, football, music, or just have a chat, I'm available all the time. So you can find me on any of those.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah, make sure to check out his work. He has a lot of great stuff for sure. So yeah, appreciate it, Elie. And yeah, we'll have to talk soon and have you back on the show for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be here.
All right. Appreciate it, man.
Of course.
All right. We're going to wrap it up there. I appreciate you tuning into another episode of the Cassels Cast. I'll catch you guys on the next one.